Fortunately, our last webinar of the year, but don't worry, we have been hard at work developing next year's webinar series. And in fact, we're going to expand from our 4 classes we did this year to 6 next year. So today, what I want to talk about is growing over winter. And as I was saying before the webinar started, I am a cold season gardener, preferably, because I will tell you that I don't really like summer. Summer's my 4th favorite season. Too much heat and too much bugs. I like growing in the cool weather because that just is what I prefer. And a lot of plants do really well in it too. What do you have growing right now? So I will tell you that right now, my garden and my community garden is still doing pretty good. We have a frost date approaching. Looking at the 10-day, it's not coming anytime soon. I got a lot of weeds in there. I got a lot of bugs in there. I got a lot of disease in there, but I'm still getting decent amount of peppers and eggplant. I still have most of my leeks to harvest, and I'm still getting a few tomatoes. I have my container garden. And in my container garden, I put more lettuce in that I grew indoors under my lights. I have some kale in there that I grew in the same way. And I have some mature zucchini plants that are producing right now that I started back around August 1st. We did a class on that way back in the day. So there's lots of stuff going on. And if you are in my office right now, and you can kind of see behind me, I have my hydroponic units going. The one behind me has, believe it or not, tomatoes and herbs growing in it. And the one that you can't see up to my left has some more lettuce going. So right now is a great time to grow. We still have amazing weather outside to grow stuff. You still have planting windows. I planted a bunch of stuff today, believe it or not, and I have on my schedule to plant more in about 2 weeks. And the reason that I do this is, and that I recommend you do this is, Ohio is a 4-season growing environment. You can grow and harvest your own food outdoors all 12 months of the year. And that doesn't even take away from the fact that you can grow indoors 12 months of the year. But if you make some wise variety choices and you couple that with season extension, you are going to be able to grow and harvest outdoors all 12 months of the year. Yes, you will be harvesting your own fresh produce in January and February. I promise you, I do it every year. I do that by using season extension, which is basically growing something outside of its normal season by using a combination of frost protection and temperature increase through row cover fabric in the cold weather, or as you can see on the left, that is using shade fabric to decrease the temperature and the sun's intensity to grow cool season things in the summer. When I grow under what's known as low tunnels, and you can see some examples of low tunnels right here. And basically I take some PVC hoops and I stretch them over my raised beds, and I like to get the fabric off the plants. Wherever it would touch the plants is going to be a problematic and thermal barrier transference. And then I use mostly row cover. And what row cover is it is an innovation out of the nursery and landscape industry. And it is a spun bonded fabric that comes in multiple weights, and lightweight, in medium weight, and heavyweight like a frost blanket. And the differences in the weights are a low weight fabric will allow a lot more sunlight to penetrate, but will not scavenge as much temperature, so you don't have as much thermal protection, where a frost blanket can provide many degrees of frost protection. It just doesn't let as much sunlight through. No matter what the weight is, however, you will get moisture that goes through that, and you will also get oxygen that goes through that. So they don't generally build up a lot of excess heat underneath them unless it's really hot outside. And the nice thing is when it rains or it snows, that moisture makes its way through to the plants, and so you don't have to irrigate as much, if at all, believe it or not, over the winter. And then commonly plastic is used. A lot of growers use plastic, usually 6 mil or thicker plastic, and that provides more thermal protection. It lets lots of sunlight go through, but boy, you can build up a lot of heat underneath plastic. And keep in mind, it never rains under the plastic too. So you might have to vent that periodically, and you might have to irrigate periodically. So there's more thermal energy captured under plastic, but there's much more work to maintain a low tunnel in plastic. I like to use an analogy from my old veterinary days. A row cover, in terms of how much work is involved, it's like a cat. You can leave for the weekend, you can put a few days worth of food out there, clean the litter boxes, you can leave for a long weekend, and when you come back, your cat is fine. Plastic, however, is like a dog, an old dog that needs pills twice a day. You got to check it all the time, and quite honestly, not that many people are going to help you out with it. So what does best to overwinter under row cover, right? These are the wise varietal choices. Cool season crops. If you want ones that will go all the way over winter, generally, your spinach, your kale are going to be bomb proof. They do great. Now, you might have to double row cover those because I've had to do that in the past. But I had spinach make it through the double polar vortex year that we had several years ago, and it did just fine with double row cover. Last year, I added bok choy under my row cover, and it did great as well. So what I'm doing this year is I'm heavy planting a large bed with any number of things. I'm talking radishes and beets and carrots and spinach and kale, a bunch of different lettuce varieties, bok choy, some leafy brassicas, because I really want to see how we can push the envelope. I want to see what actually can be overwintered. Now, in this one right here, this is a bunch of leafy greens with some brassicas, and here's a good spinach pick. I am growing peas outside right now. They won't go over winter, right? They need a pollinator, and that's going to limit them. But you'll note that most of these cool season crops, the ones we grow in spring, you don't need a pollinator for them. We actually harvest them before they would ever go to flower. And so what I recommend is, take a risk. As I like to say, vegetables cost money, but seeds are cheap. And you still have tons of seeds in those packets. If you're anything like me, you got packets of seed all over the place. So here is a series of videos that details an average sort of planting on how you would plant and maintain spinach over a course of a winter season. So you can plant spinach almost at any time. It germinates at very low soil temperatures. It doesn't germinate very well on its best day, and it doesn't germinate very well on high temperature soil temperatures. But I planted some a couple weeks ago. I planted, and I'm going to plant some in a couple weeks and just get my ideal time. But you got a raised bed. You've already used it to grow something in there. Make sure you just kind of clean out that organic matter, get it cleaned up a little bit, create your seed bed. I like to broadcast my seed on there. I usually sow it probably thicker than I should, and then I rake it in, and then I water it in to make sure I got good seed to soil contact. And then I sleeve PVC over screws, and then I apply my row cover. You wouldn't necessarily need to put it on right at that minute, but I do in a lot of cases, just because if I don't really have to monitor it very closely, and I worry that if it starts to germinate and grow, that I will have nuisance wildlife take care of it. So this is that same bed. I threw row cover over the PVC. This is frost blanket. You can see it's pretty thick, and it actually does a great job at protecting against nuisance wildlife. Really, the only ones that would completely blow through it and ignore it would be groundhogs. But for deer, for birds, bunny rabbits, and squirrels, this stuff's pretty protective. And then we had decent germination on our spinach seedlings, probably a little bit more than I wanted. I generally overplant and then thin just because I want to have a nice thick stand that's in there. And so this was thinned out a little bit. And then what we have is November 15th. So we're a month later, okay? And what you can do is open up your row cover periodically when you get a nice temperature zone, because now we're getting into cold temps and you don't want to really mess too much with the thermal mass. You'll notice I rolled away from the row cover, and that's to keep dropping a bunch of seed or a bunch of dirt onto the seedlings. But that's a nice looking batch of spinach in there. Believe it or not, 1 month in, you could go in with some scissors and you could harvest these baby spinach leaves. You could grab a Kroger bag out of this, and you can see the spinach is persisting pretty well. You can see that some plants that were weeds in here that were not cold tolerant, even with row cover, they did not do well and they died because they were heat lovers. But the spinach is doing great and it's growing very well. What you're going to be able to do going forward is every couple of weeks or so, really whenever you get a nice time window, meaning you want it to be above 45 degrees or so, but we get those days all the time in the winter. I usually target around midday because everything's thawed out and we've got a good amount of thermal energy underneath the row cover. The row cover, if it was freezing overnight, you want to make it sure that it is thawed before you start messing with it, or you can rip it. And you really want to be gentle with your row cover because you'll get multiple years of use out of it, because frost blanket's pretty thick. And if you baby it a little bit, you'll have it for many, many years. But you're going to find that once you can pop the top safely, you can grab a decent size harvest because this is going to produce a lot. And then you want to make sure that you replace that row cover so that you can allow that basically that thermal energy to bring that back up to temperature before it gets cold overnight. So this is actually a whole winter of the same plot, and I had one batch of frost blanket over it, and that's fine for majority of cold weather, but I'm always taking a look at my weather going forward. And honestly, spinach under frost blanket at 18, 19, 17 degrees would be fine, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss any kind of deep cold. So I actually threw a second layer over it, and I will commonly double cover with frost blanket over my spinach, kale, lettuces, all of those plantings. They're not growing really fast, and they are spring and fall cool season plants. So they're normally used to growing with less sun intensity and less daylight length. They also don't grow really rapidly, so they're not really needing a tremendous amount of fertility or nutrition. I do fertilization at the beginning of the year, but I've never really had to water other than that first maybe one, maybe two, maybe three times until they germinate and start to grow their own root system. So December 9th, as you saw from this prior picture, we were starting to get chilly. Right around here, I threw double row cover over it. And then a couple years ago, if you remember, we had a pretty brutal cold snap right around the holidays, and we got a bunch of snow, we got a bunch of ice. I will tell you, snow is your friend when you're growing under row cover. You will find that snow has an insulation to it, like another blanket layer. Ice, not so much. Ice will freeze the row cover. Ice can freeze on it, make it heavy, predispose it to ripping. And then if the row cover's frozen and you try to move it or pop the top, you're going to rip it again. So I don't mind this. As this melts, this is just going to water the plants that I have underneath. And then this is fun. And this is true. This truly happens. Look, January 16th. Okay. On January 22nd, 6 days later, we had warmed up tremendously like we seem to always get in Ohio, and I had an opportunity to go grab a harvest. And you'll notice that all the snow is gone and I'm in my shirt sleeves. Roll that cover away from your plants. Look at all that dirt on there. You don't want to drop that. Your plants are pretty pristine in there, but look at how beautiful that spinach looks. This spinach is growing like mad. You can harvest a ton out right now. I mean, I would probably take a quarter of the volume of this bed if I thought I could eat it all. And then you'll notice there's a couple other cool season varieties that that had been grown in this bed in the past where some of the seeds were germinating. We got a green onion here and we got a carrot right here. So these are some other cool season varieties that lived pretty well underneath this, even with that amount of snow. Now you want to be grabbing your harvest a lot because here's what happens. Once we get a little bit more sun, once we get a lot more sun intensity and daylight length, and it starts to warm up and we get a bunch of rain, this spinach will grow like mad. And so you'll be harvesting it all of the time. But I'll tell you what, if you have never tasted overwintered spinach where the leaves get big and they're thick and they're chewy and the flavor's amazing because it matured in the cold weather, it will change your life. I just love spinach when it's that big. I like to eat it fresh. I like to cook with it. You're saying to yourself, Tim, I don't have a raised bed. Remember, we talked about containers. Well, I have grown spinach in containers as well, and I have planted fairly late in the season. You just use all the same principles that we talked about, double row cover if needed. Make sure that you have your containers in a beneficial micro environment for growing. I have mine on my driveway in black containers next to my house, right next to my garage. All of those are heat trapping sinks that slowly release that heat overnight and help my crop persist. But I've had great success growing spinach over winter, even with snow and ice and cold weather in containers. So what else can you do? Because there's some good time that you can use when you're growing over winter. So I like to clean my seed starting area and have no plants whatsoever underneath it. I like to have a biosecurity thing. I really use my seed starting area for the majority of the year. I will take it offline in the middle of the hottest part of the summer, and I will take it offline around the holidays because I want to make sure everything's clean. And if there was any bugs there, that I can address them. I try to minimize any potential bugs even being there, meaning I don't bring any outside plants to put them under the lights where I start my seedlings, right? Because that's like the baby seed ICU, and I don't want to introduce any pests or disease. And then I'm making my spring plans, and then I'm growing other stuff. I love to grow indoors with hydroponics. But what I'm also doing is thinking about when is the earliest time I can start seeds indoors under my lights to get them outside by using season extension on the other side of the new year, because you can actually take a season extension fabric in your raised bed, and even if you have nothing growing in it, you can cover it, building up heat underneath it, trying to heat up that soil temperature. Remember, plants and seeds live in the soil. So if you can raise that soil temperature, even getting it 40, 50 degrees, you can start transplants indoor that you can put outside. And I have planted in February transplants outside that I started in January and harvested them in March. And what I did is I just checked my weather predictions to make sure that we were going to have weather conducive to that. Now, we've had some tricky springs. The last two, we have had snow on trees in full leaf in April this year. And 2 years ago, if you remember, we had cold temperatures, bitter cold in April and May. So we'll see how we do with that. But quite honestly, same as growing over winter, growing in that very early spring, if you can protect your plants with season extension, generally they do just fine in cool weather. They don't mind cool, and they don't mind the extra water. So if you're going to think about right after the holidays, can I start planting? What can I do with my planting outside? Check your weather. Make sure you have the necessary materials to grow indoors, and pretty much what that comes down to is a good grow light. But then take some risks, right? Experimental. I almost always start a 6-pack, few 6-packs of some of the things like bok choy and lettuce and arugula and things that do well in the cool weather in January, with an eye on putting them out in February. I might need to use plastic. Plastic will tremendously preheat the soil. If you can create like a greenhouse basically over your raised bed 2 weeks before you would ever plant, you're going to warm that soil up in there. And like I said earlier in the presentation, vegetables cost money, seeds are cheap. So take risks, because if you succeed, then what happens is you're eating your own fresh vegetables that you grew yourself in a season where you never thought that would be possible. So, and like I said, when to plant is this. You check out the NOAA weather feeds. I generally, every month, I put out the thing on Growing Franklin, my website that we've shared with you before. I'll do a post on what's going on right this minute in the community garden, talking about where soil temps are. And then I like to artificially raise the soil temps if I can a little bit by canopying over that with either row cover or plastic, so that I can get that up a bit. And then I'm starting things indoors under my grow lights, trying to get them outdoor, and start that growth and getting a harvest. Now, the other way I love to grow is I love to grow indoors using hydroponics. So one of the things that is not as well known about Ohio is we are huge in the controlled environment agriculture industry, and that means hydroponics generally, or aeroponics. And that is, in fact, we're a top 5 state. We might be number 4, actually. We have had tremendous growth. We grow not generally here in Franklin County, although that's slowly changing. Most of the big, huge greenhouses, and we're talking hundreds of acres under glass, are in the northern part of the state. But we grow a sizable amount of fresh vegetables and herbs here in Ohio in controlled environment agriculture. And in fact, the USDA agricultural census showed from 2012 to 2017 that nationwide there was a 132% increase in the production of fresh vegetables and herbs in controlled environment agriculture. And Ohio led the way with a 292% increase. A lot of the programming that I do locally is trying to introduce some of these new agricultural techniques to students from K to 12, because we have opportunity. We need skilled agricultural workers, and there are the jobs out there to do that. So there's lots of different ways that you can do that. I recommend, if you haven't done it, and I think we have this as one of our topics next year, but starting your own seeds under grow lights is as empowering for the grower as you can possibly imagine, because then you grow whatever you want. Every single thing that is in the catalog can be grown that way. But a nice thing to do inside is purchase, or believe it or not, build your own hydroponics system in there. And they come in, you can find kits that you can see on YouTube. You can pre-purchase systems that all you do is basically add water, add seed pods, and press a button, and it grows them for you. But I do that every year. I'm doing that right now in my office. And these are pictures taken from my office a couple years ago. They have hybrid tomatoes that will grow, believe it or not, on your desk in a hydroponic unit, and they are very productive and flavorful. Or you can grow reams of lettuce. I was getting a Kroger bag every week or so off of this unit right there. You can buy them from lots of different companies. In fact, this is a company right here in Ohio that makes things that are more analogous to what is used in industry. And I just purchased one of these guys right there because I am going to use it for teaching, because I'm helping some schools get these units put in there. But I have that planted right now in my office. Let me go back. This is a tabletop unit. You have the bottom part of it here filled with nutrient solution, and it's got basically a little fish tank pump in there, and it pumps the nutrient solution up through these white tubes to the top. You can see it's slowly graded. The roots of the plants are in this channel. They're bathed with the nutrient solution, and then it recycles it back in to the tank, and it just keeps going over and over again. And I got one going right now. I wonder if I can turn my computer around and you guys can see. I don't know. Right there. So take a look online and see how you can do that. They have lots of different things. This is actually a piece of furniture, believe it or not. This is an end table that you can purchase. The top part of it is the tabletop. Underneath the tabletop is the LED lighting system, and the tank reservoir is on the bottom. And then you put those 4-inch pots that you can purchase from like any store that has the transplants in 4-inch pots, and you set them in there, and you could do flowers. I've done kale, I've done spinach and lettuce. It's actually pretty cool. And as well as functional. You can put this right in your living room and you have functional furniture. All right, I see we have chat questions. I saw you. I'm going right in there right now. Okay. First question, I've heard of people using Christmas lights spread through the raised beds to warm up the soil. Does this work, assuming you have electricity close to your garden? I have not heard that. These Christmas lights that I'm guessing they would use would be incandescents, because LEDs don't generate a tremendous amount of light. I would not recommend that, because they would be basically in contact with the soil, which means you have the chance that there would be electric shock. So I would not recommend that. What I would recommend you do would be to take some clear plastic and tent that over a bed to pre-warm it, and that will basically turn that into sort of like a high tunnel or a hoop house in miniature, and that would be a safer way to raise the temperatures. What temperature is needed for indoor growing of seedlings? I have a 3-season room that is not heated but gets in the 60s when it's sunny, probably 40s overnight. So the key component of indoor growing of seedlings is the temperature range needed for germination. Once they're germinated, they would probably grow fine in there, although you would still need to supplement light. That's the whole thing. Is the grow light is key, because seedlings, to germinate and get that nice stocky stem, they need a serious amount of light, and no level of purely outdoor Ohio light is going to do that over winter. So you could grow them in a 3-season room. You would still need supplemental lighting. You probably would want to germinate them indoors, or use what's known as a seed germination mat. They make basically like these little heat mats that you can set the seedling tray on, and you can set it for certain temperatures. If you were growing, say, tomatoes, they germinate best closer to like that 70 to 80 degree soil temperatures. If you're growing lettuces or spinach, they're going to germinate better closer to that 60-degree soil temperature. If you think about it, hot weather crops like warmer soil, cool season crops like cooler soil. But if your soil was cold in the 3-season room, what's going to happen is your germination is going to be delayed, and your germination percentage is probably not going to be where you would like it. But it's still possible. You can try it as an experiment. All right, I planted spinach and lettuce a month ago in containers on my back patio. The critters had a buffet. Yes, so I didn't have this picture in there, but what I do is I put bird netting over my containers. And, you know, my container garden is in my backyard, which is just squirrel and bunny and bird. They just would eat my food. So the minute I put my transplants in my containers, I take some either metal or PVC hoops and I put bird netting over it. Bird netting has minimal restrictions on sunlight getting through it, moisture getting through it, oxygen getting through it, but it does a pretty good job of keeping the critters from going through it. And bird netting can last a long time if you take care of it. All right, any tips for preparing beds for next summer too? I'm dealing with tomato fungus in a brand new raised bed and I really want to start over in my beds with great dirt. So yes, make sure that you clean up all disease material, pretty much all residue out of your bed that you can. And I generally do like to have beds covered over the winter. If you only have one, that can be difficult because you'll want to get in early in spring to plant, but you could cover them with compost, you could cover it with straw, shredded leaves. You're generally going to need to top the soil off next year. And another way you could cover that is a cover crop, which is a crop of generally some sort of agronomic crop relative like a rye or oats or something like that that you plant to maintain living roots inside the raised bed. And then you terminate that in spring and you incorporate it so that you're adding organic matter and you're preventing erosive loss. So if it was me and I had just say you have one raised bed, and you want to grow tomatoes in it every year, normally I would say we would want to crop rotate, right? We want to grow a different thing in that space because if we already know that we have tomato fungal disease in there, tomato fungal disease generally has spores in the soil, which means you're going to have the potential to encounter it next year. I wouldn't let that hold you back, right? Because we get tomato fungal disease every year. But what I would do is if you have more space, I would crop rotate and grow everything in the tomato family in a different space instead of that space next year. But if you can only grow in that space and you want to grow tomatoes every year, then I would make sure that you soil test so you provide proper nutrition so you get good growth on your tomatoes. I would consider resistant varieties for some of the fungal diseases in there since you know you have that space already. I would amend it with organic matter so that you can increase your organic matter percentage as best as possible. And then I would make sure to do good pruning on your tomatoes next year so that you increase airflow around there, which should slow down some of the fungal disease. And then after you plant your tomatoes, I would mulch pretty well so that what happens is you keep those tomato spores inside the soil and not splashing up on your tomato leaves. All right, do you have special lights for your office desktop plants? Yes, I have LED grow lights and I've tried multiple different varieties. There's lots of good stuff out there. I don't have a specific one to recommend, but you want to make sure that you get one that's labeled for use for vegetables or for herbs or something like that, because the ones that are smaller that you'll see that people use for house plants in the winter do not provide the level of intensity that you would need to grow, say, tomato seedlings. You need to get some ones that are rated good for veggies. All right. Question is, I hopped on a bit late, so I apologize if this was covered, but do you have any suggestions about spraying outdoor plants that I want to bring inside for the winter to get rid of any bugs? So the first thing you would need to do is figure out what the bug is, because that's going to guide your choice. And so my recommendation would be get with some magnification close to check for bugs. That's your scouting. Identify what bug that is so that you can spray. And then if you're going to bring them in, I don't recommend that they go in under any lights that you would use for starting seedlings, or else what happens is you go to start seedlings, any potential bugs that are on a mature plant are going to jump off and they're going to cause problems with your seedlings, which are much, much more tender. So if you have a separate area that you can keep them, that's fine. But keep in mind too, bugs fly. And so I don't personally bring any of my outdoor plants in to put anywhere near where I do my seed starting. Okay. I feel like we have more chat questions. Have I missed any? No, it looked like we're pretty good. Oh, we got one coming here. Okay, you're welcome. Everybody, you're welcome. This has been a great presentation, great questions. And so here's my take home for y'all. Think about ways that you might be able to, if you haven't grown over winter, think about how you can give it a try. That might be a big giant container. That might be a spot in your yard where, quite honestly, you don't have any sun in the summer, but when the leaves fall, you do all of a sudden have sun, and that's a potential opportunity to grow. And then start with spinach or kale, because they're literally bomb proof. plant them, get them started soon, make sure that you're in decent soil, mild amount of fertilizer because they're not going to need a ton, thin them to keep them happy, and then get them covered with the row cover as soon as you can. And I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised at what you can grow over winter. And then if you're good this year, ask Santa to see if they can bring you a hydroponic unit, because growing indoors is super fun. Other than that, take a look online. I know a lot of people that have turned some PVC units and small pumps with Tupperware nutrient reservoirs into some pretty nice systems using LED lighting. When I took the hydroponic unit classes to learn all about hydroponics here at OSU, my senior project was using a litter box to grow 6 lettuce heads in. I was going to use an aquarium bubbler, I was going to use a litter box, and I was going to cut little holes in the styrofoam mat that was going to be the exact size to fit inside the litter box without letting any light through to the nutrient solution. And other than the lights, the cost for the system was going to be minimal. And so take a look at that. And otherwise, we are bumping up at noon. So thanks, everybody.